Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I trust that some more people will be joining us shortly. Our topic for today is initiative in the middle game. So, when we think about the word initiative, the thought that comes to mind is having the upper hand, having the advantage. So, the first part of today's presentation, I will be going through very quickly because it is things that have been discussed already in previous sessions and things that players are aware of. But in discussing these things, you will actually see there are similarities. There are some of the points that actually overlap into the different categories. When one considers initiative in the middle game, there are very many reasons that you could say this is the reason that I have had the initiative or not. It can be placed into various categories, but I'm just going to mention a few. The initiative, you could have the upper hand based upon the fact that you have a positional advantage. It could be based upon the fact that you have more active pieces going at that moment. It could be based upon the fact that you are controlling the center. It could also be a material advantage. You could be on the attack. Your opponent's pieces might be blocked. It could also be based upon the fact that the center is closed and based upon the respective pieces that you have on the board. Perhaps if the center is closed, you are having the knights and the opponent's bishops are blocked, or that type of thing. So there are various um, different points that we could say that contribute to the reason for you holding the initiative. It could also be based upon the current pawn structure. You could be having less pawn islands than your opponent. Your opponent could be having a bad pawn structure, could be having some isolated pawns, etc. Okay, so in discussing, first of all, principles of positional chess, so the theory I'm going to be going through very quickly because we had discussed it in the past. I'm just going to remind you of some of the things that we have said related to the middle game. Under principles of positional chess, there are 7 points that I wish to highlight. Firstly, improve the positions of your pieces, creating a favorable pawn structure, and then restricting your opponent's pieces. Okay, in 2 of the games that we'll be going through during this presentation, you will actually see me referring to this. I will highlight 2 games which actually illustrate how you could end up restricting your opponent's pieces and what had happened in the one game, particularly which was played in the World Championship match of 1985. Okay, so you could restrict your opponent's pieces through exchanging active pieces. You could drive pieces away from the active positions, often by attacking them with a pawn or a piece of lesser value. And then thirdly, you could restrict your opponent's pieces through controlling the square to which the opposing pieces can move. So you need to then preempt your opponent's plan, and then you get in there first and control those squares. I mentioned the fact that you minimize pawn islands. So the less pawn groupings you have, the better it is for you. One of the other principles of positional chess is the fact that you neutralize your opponent's plan. And then after you've got small advantages, you accumulated these small advantages, and then you end up converting the temporary advantages into permanent advantages. And then I've just added the additional principle of not rushing your moves. And this is consistent throughout every stage of the game. When you have the initiative, you should not let go of the initiative. That means you need to be focused. And if you end up rushing your moves, then you're going to end up handing back that initiative to your opponent, because you might not always be making the best moves at all times. So now you've got the initiative in chess, in the middle game. So now, how do you go about finishing off the opponent? How do you go about maintaining this initiative? The simple solution is the fact that you need to be playing attacking chess. So I'm just going to highlight some of the principles of attacking chess that you need to adhere to. Bearing in mind that when you are attacking, and over the past few weeks in our sessions, we've spoken about the principle of having two weaknesses. So when you are increasing your attack, your opponent is going to be on the defense. So you need to come up with the best move at all times. So you always need to be creating a threat with each and every move. We must not just aim to make aimless moves. There must be a reason why you are making that move. Simply put, a threat is an attack. So if you are attacking, your opponent is going to be defending. So aim to create a threat with each and every move, and your opponent will have to be on the defensive. Secondly, exploit your opponent's weaknesses. If you feel that you are running out of plans, do a checks, captures, and threats analysis on the board. Identify those weaknesses, and that will become your attacking point. It will become your focal point on the board. I said earlier, we should not rush. So one of the principles of attacking chess is the fact that you need to concentrate your pieces before attacking. You need to first have that build up. Get your pieces into position, and you do not also just want to be attacking with one or two moves, but you'd want to have that combination happening. Okay, and a combination is a series of attacking moves. So you want to see that combination happening, and you can only do that when all of your pieces are in position and the one move is going to be following the other. It is also important that when you're attacking, you need to open up the position. And it is for this reason, therefore, that your center pawns and your center control is so critical. Because pawns ultimately are the ones to break down the opponent's defense. Failing that, you might end up having to make a sacrifice or two in order to open up the position. And in one of the games, you'll actually see how the castled king had to be opened up by way of a sacrifice. Exchange of key defenders. So you need to, when you're attacking, you need to identify from your opponent's side which pieces are the key defenders, which pieces from your opponent's side are the obstacles that actually limit your attack. So you need to get rid of these key defenders. If you have the initiative, and that is our topic for today, if you have the initiative, avoid exchanges. You need those most attacking pieces of yours to finish off the game. So avoid exchanging your most active pieces, because then you're going to allow your opponent's inactive pieces to be removed. You're going to allow your opponent to come back into the game and to be able to regroup. And then you also need to attack on both sides of the board. So these points that I'm going through very quickly, we will be coming back to them, actually see how it fits in with the games that we're going to be going through. The next point is most important middle game principles. And like I said, there's a repetition for some of these points. It might have come up already under the positional and attacking principles. The first thing is centralize your pieces, because that is where the activity is going to happen, in the center of the board. It doesn't help you getting your pieces stuck on the side of the board and they will be completely offside. and on the wrong side of the board. They need to be there where the action is. The second point, when we talk about flank pawns, we're talking about those pawns on the side. We're talking about the rook pawns and the knight pawns. Exchange those flank pawns. Always try to capture towards the center. And as I mentioned a minute ago, it is those center pawns that you're going to need to break down the opponent's defenses. Pawn structure is extremely important in chess, particularly in the middle game. If there are any pawn weaknesses that arose from the opening stage, it is going to be to your disadvantage, or if your opponent has pawn weaknesses, it's going to be to your opponent's disadvantage, and you will be able to take full advantage of that. So you need to, from your side, avoid any pawn weaknesses. Furthermore, you need to avoid creating weaknesses. Okay, not only pawn weaknesses, but you need to avoid creating weaknesses in your own position. And that also extends to the rest of your pieces. If your opponent has an isolated pawn, you should always aim to blockade the isolated pawn. And the most suitable piece that has been identified in the past, the most suitable piece to blockade the isolated pawn is a knight. Some people will say that they prefer bishop to block the isolated pawn. But in my opinion, the knight is the most effective piece to block the isolated pawn. And by now, you also know that if there's open files, get your rooks in there first. If the position is open, aim to keep the bishop pair. And if it is closed, then obviously you will hold on to your knights. Any questions or comments so far from anybody? Okay, I'm going to switch over to the next one. The first part, which speaks about 7 simple yet powerful middle game ideas that win games. There is some graphics involved there. Let me just see, there's a message there.
No, I just posted the lesson plan there, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next point, folks, is the 7 simple yet powerful middle game ideas that win games. I just thought I'll add this in. It was a handout that was emailed to me somewhere in 2013 already, and I thought it might be useful for today. The first part says that the bishop should be positioned in front of your pawn chain. Okay, and if you look at it, if this bishop in front of the pawn chain on d4, it is most effective because it's got open diagonals to operate on. Okay, and it is supported by the pawn chain. If it's behind the pawn chain, it's going to be completely out of the game. It will be blocked as well. Okay, so if you want your bishop to be effective, you need to place it in front of open diagonals. The second one, gaining control of the center, are points that we have already discussed in the, in the other principles. And from this diagram, you can actually see the pawns on e4, d4, and c3, how they are controlling that entire center and how they are limiting Black's development of his pieces. Right. You can already see what's going to be happening, that pawn on e4 is going to be chasing away the e5 knight, f6 knight by going to e4, e5, and somewhere along the line it's going to activate a strong attack from white because the bishops are already pointing to the king side, and sooner or later there is a combination that is going to be following. But center controls are extremely important. black spawns on d6 and b6, they are controlling the same squares, but that is within their own half of the board. All right. So total dominance is key. Central dominance is key. Then an outpost for the square. Okay. The outpost, as most of us know, is a square on the opponent's side of the board that is not controlled by any of his pawns. Right. It's that lookout point. So here we can already see that the white knight on e4 is heading for d6. Okay, and there it will be controlling key squares e8, f7, c8, b7. It will actually also be shutting down the d file for black to be able to attack. All right, then number 4 is mentioned in one of the other principles as well, in the middle game principles, that rooks actually belong on open and semi-open files. If they are connected and they are double, that is actually a bonus. Okay. Similarly, you would want to place your bishop on an open diagonal. So if you get in there first, like in our diagram, white's got his rook on c1 already. He can now just move his rook further up, perhaps to c5 or c3, and double his rooks. All right. The next point, point number 5, sorry, is a point that I found very interesting. Exchanging the king's fianchetto bishop is not a good idea, since that seriously weakens the king's side and makes the king more vulnerable. The king's side fianchetto bishop is a strong defending piece. It controls many important squares which immediately become weak if the bishop is gone. Okay, and they say that you need to hold on to that bishop. We did say hold on to the bishop pair. So the fianchetto bishop is that bishop which is developed to the longest diagonal on the board. In this case, black developed his bishop to g7. And you can see that if that bishop on g7 is exchanged or removed from the board, the black king will become very, very vulnerable in terms of his defense. All right. So, and that's why you'll see that an opening like the dragon variation of the Sicilian defense, where the bishop is developed onto g7, you'll see that most times white will play his bishop to e3 and the queen to d2, so that the bishop can go to h6 and try to force the exchange of the g7 bishop, the fianchetto bishop. All right, then number 6, it says avoid pushing the king's side pawns. And basically you should try and avoid it because it will weaken the king's defense, but it will also open up diagonals and it will create many unprotected squares. Okay. It doesn't mean that you must not push these pawns, but when you are going to intend pushing these pawns, you must only push it if it is going to be creating a favorable condition. So your timing must be right. Okay, and you must look at the entire board and see whether it is a good tactical motive or not. So in this example here, you'll see that white has pushed his pawns, his king side pawns. Okay, anybody can you tell me, was this a good idea of white to be pushing these pawns like this? Is the time right? Segelar.
Uh, I would say no, because of Black's rook is pointing to the file, so he can just double it and force his way through the king's side.
Correct. Okay, it might be a good idea later on, but right now the timing is not right because perhaps the rooks and other pieces should also get into position first. Okay, and then start with such an attack. Okay, it is also leaving the white king pretty vulnerable. Thank you for that. All right, then number seven says anticipate the opponent's threats, but this is relevant to each and every stage of the game. With each and every move, we need to first identify what our opponent is planning before we make our own moves. Okay, and this is especially important for you in the middle game. You need to not only think of attack, but you also need to try and stop your opponent. So if you look at this position, you do not want your opponent to be getting those outposts and so forth. So you need to stop those plans. You need to stop those pawn advances or whatever your opponent has got lined up. It is important before you embark on an attacking plan that you first look and assess what the defensive situation is, and then identify what tactics you can come up with, because you need to try and avoid most of the tactical motives that your opponent has got in mind. So you need to kind of predict what your opponent has got in store. Okay. Folks, is there any comment or questions from anybody before I move off from this and move over to the games? Anybody have any questions? Okay. I'm just waiting for the lead chess program to open up. Just bear with me. It was open earlier. Okay. All right. So the first game that we're going to be looking at as part of the concepts that I touched on earlier with regard to the various principles, one of it is having a lead in development. And this game I also presented at one of the other sessions that we had a few weeks ago. But I'm fascinated with this game because it is a very short game, but it is very much there's a lot that we can learn from this game. Okay, the theme for this game is the lead in development, and you'll see why White actually won this game. Okay, because he had the advantage, and when it came to the middle game, he was able to go ahead. Once you've completed your development, once you've completed the king's safety aspect, and if you find that you're controlling the center, then you can proceed with your attack. Your opponent, if your opponent has not completed the development of his pieces, that opponent is still stuck in the opening phase, and then you are just carrying on with the middle game. And if you are attacking first, then you're going to find that your opponent is not able to start an attack, but your opponent will have to be on the back foot from the outset and to be defending. So let's look at what happened in this game. It was a game played between Spielmann in 1914 and Framberg. So I'm just going to carry on up to a certain point. The opening here, I asked it a few weeks ago. Can anybody identify what the opening is? The second move, knight c3, gives us a clue. Tristan, do you know what opening that is? Okay, people, it's the Vienna game. Let's just continue up till there. So you can see black's on the back foot because white is immediately coming up with some attack. White's aim is to remove the e5 pawn. White alone wants to control the center. Okay, so black comes with a counter gambit. Okay, I'm just going a bit further. Bishop g4 for white, kind of gaining for black. Sorry, kind of gains a tempo, developing and attacking. So immediately there's the pin. Very funny move. Queen e2. Should we not be focusing on getting out of the pin instead of keeping ourselves within the pin? Okay, so that's just a question that I'm leaving for you there. Obviously, you could see that knight on e4 was going to be chased away with the very next move via d3. Or also there could have been the exchange of knights and the loss of a pawn. But now following on d4, immediately you see the advantage, the central advantage that white is now having. Queen's exchange. Okay, so now you'll see black did that. The check provoked the weakness of g3, but now he's gaining the pawn. Okay, but it is not for too long. White gives off the pawn, and you see now in order to develop, so it's a bit of a gambit. It was the gambit idea there, but now there are two pawns that are lost with that very next move. Two pawns being threatened. Two pawns that have been gained. Tristan, can you tell me for black, what move is black now threatening for this next move? Black has just taken the pawn on e4, e5. Raveen, Sekhalar. What move would black be threatening now? Something that white needs to look out for. Is it Garayan? Okay, people, I'm not getting a response. I'm going to have to help you here. D4 is definitely a threat. There is the pin from the queen onto the bishop, the e3 bishop, and the d4 will be the fork that is being threatened. So let's see what happens. Queenside castling. Immediately that threat is stopped, and now immediately you also see an attack going on the d5 pawn. All right. My question, if you're too shy to answer loudly, you can type the answer for me. Who do you think is better off at this stage, white or black? Bearing in mind that black has got 2 pawns more than white. Anybody can answer that. You're welcome to either say it out loud or type me the answer. Who's better off, white or black? Who's got the advantage? Mumtaz? You can type the answer for me also, it's fine. Ah, I see an answer coming up. Oh, yeah, Michael. Michael says quiet crowd tonight. Michael, that's not the answer I wanted, but yeah, you're right. Very quiet crowd tonight. I feel like I'm speaking to myself. Yes, Michael. And I have to answer myself back as well. Guys, for the sake of progress, white or black, who's better off at this stage?
Well, probably white, because white is now fully developed. It's castled, and black's king is still out there in the middle.
Okay, great. Okay, Grant, is it worthwhile? Does white need to worry about the 2 pawns that he's behind on?
So I just joined, so I don't know the position.
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you. All right. I'd say at this stage, yes, white is better off. He need not worry about the 2 pawns that he's behind on. He's just queenside castle. He's about to develop his bishop. But look at the fact that the white queen and the black queen and the king are in the same file. Okay, so you can actually prepare yourself that something is going to happen on that file there. The rook is on d1. It's already in the center, but after the development of this bishop, the rook to either to e1 or to f1. It's definitely a possibility. There, with the queenside castling, there's also immediately an attack on d file, on the d5 square. Okay, so yeah, thanks for that. c6 to defend the d5 pawn. But look at that. Who would have expected that sacrifice to happen there? Knight takes d5. All right, now I need a smart answer. Hi, Takutsua, good evening. Takutsua, I need your help here. I've got a very quiet crowd tonight. Talk to me, why did the knight take that pawn on d5? What is white's plan?
I think after c takes knight, then bishop b5 is coming. Bishop b5 check is coming.
Right, okay. There's also something else that can happen on d5. What is that?
The rook can take.
Rook takes d5 and then we have a fork. Correct?
Yes, of the knight and
Oh.
the.
Okay, and then white would have recovered these 2 pawns that he was down. Thank you, Takutsua. You saved my life there. All right, so c takes d5, and there we go. Rook takes d5. Takutsa also pointed out to us the fact that the bishop can still come to b5, and black is left vulnerable because of the fact that the light squared bishop is already off from the board. Okay, so queen goes back there, and instead of b5, bishop to c4, and now there is the obvious threat of rook to d8 for the discovered attack. Okay, and then he could lose his queen. So queen comes back, e4. Why is black allowed to take white's queen? What is the combination there?
Rook e1. If the queen takes, then rook e1 leads to checkmate.
Almost checkmate, because you can only do the bishop on e7. Okay? And then after the rook takes the bishop, then he comes back and he can then get the queen back, but it could also lead to checkmate. Very, very good. Okay, so, and that's where black resigned. All right, cried enough. The key to the winning of this game for white was the fact that white mobilized his pieces very quickly, developed very quickly. He was not worried about losing those 2 pawns. Look at how black's pieces, after 15 moves, black's pieces, 4 of them are still stuck. Okay, in the original positions. It shows that black was more intent on moving his queen quite a few times, was more intent on gobbling up some pawns, took some risks there. The king in itself is still very much open. There are open files, etc. White is completely dominant in the center, and that is key. All right, so that was gaining the initiative and having the lead in development and upholding that lead, building up an attack and using different tactics. All right, and even in this case, you'll see that white had even castled as well. All right, often I teach my students that you can develop, have the center control and castle everything within 10 moves. That should be one of your aims in the opening. All right. Starting with your minor pieces, which are your bishops and your knights. And then your pawns, of course, your center pawns particularly. But here, 15 moves later, you'll see that this person, this grandmaster, did not even finish the development of his minor pieces. Okay, so let's look at the second one. In this game, it's a second theme based upon the initiative in the opening. In this one, we're talking about exploiting weaknesses. So here we are looking at exploiting weaknesses in the castle position. So I've just got the note here, which I want to read through to you quickly, is that the idea is to provoke pawns in the castle position and so create one or more weak points. So that if you exploit weaknesses by simply exchanging off the pieces, which are defending the weak point. So those are your themes, which, if you remember, I touched on earlier in the games. Okay, so let me just start off. It's the game played between Kirsten Boyne and Yusuf. So let's just see what happened here. I think you will immediately recognize the Sicilian defense. Not many players play the bishop to b5 move. Black is going for the dragon variation. Okay, so immediately you see there's the center pawn happening there. The double pawn, beg your pardon, the double pawn happening there for black. Let's see how white continues. By playing knight to c3, black could also have taken the knight on c3. White was actually inviting him so that he could get rid of that Fianchetto bishop, the kingside bishop that I said earlier. You need to hold on to your kingside Fianchetto bishop. h3. I'm not too sure. Do you guys think that was a good move? What purpose does that serve? Was h3 a good move? Where's Tristan? Tristan, was h3 a good move or is it a wasted move? Oh, Tristan's gone.
Wasted.
Wasted move. I agree. Okay, that's what we call a prophylactic move, a wasted pawn move. But the only thing I could say is that white is basically playing a waiting game there. Wanted to see what black's plans were. Okay, but there was really no purpose. Remember, if each time you move a pawn there, it creates a weakness, and definitely there was no purpose to that. Okay, so immediately taking advantage, there is a pawn on e5 now. And I wanted to see that white, he intended pushing that pawn to e5 because of the fact that the black king is still stuck in the center. So certainly there's some plans that are already underfoot there. Knight to e4. I want you to see that there's a long-term plan happening. Okay, that knight might seem very passive at this stage. It is attacking the c5 pawn, but there is also a brilliant idea by black that's going to be happening. Okay, I'm going to open up to anybody to answer me. What is the idea of knight e4? What other possibility is there? Maybe I should ask Michael.
No, I actually have to think now.
I'm going to give you a clue, Michael. Rook is on e1 already. King is still stuck in the center. So what is the possibility of that knight on e4?
There's some alignment issues, so I presume we have some ideas of knight d6 or knight f6 at some other point.
Absolutely correct. Okay, let's hold that thought and let's see what happens. Thanks, Michael. Okay, so immediately black castles. d3 comes. Notice not d4, and there even he plays d3 instead of the d4 because he wants to just keep that knight parked there. I mean, you'd want to possibly try and think of supporting the e5 pawn, but having the idea to chase away the knight. So now that knight can only go back to c7 or b4. But at the same time, there's a big hole then on d4. All right, so c7. I want you to see, guys, how many times in this game black is moving that knight. Started off with f6, d5, c7, and is not even finished yet. You're going to actually see more activity from that knight. All right, and there we go. e6, aiming for the d4 square. Okay, so the bishop e3 to stop the knight going to d4. But if you guys remember what I said earlier, you've got Fianchetto bishop. So what should you aim to do? If you have the Fianchetto bishop, white should aim to do what? You've got the queen on e3. So the next move for white would aim to be going where? Karayan? What would you aim to do as white with regard to black's Fianchetto bishop?
Queen d2.
Yeah, correct. You're going to aim to get your queen there to d2, and then you're going to aim to exchange bishops. Thank you. All right, so there goes queen to d2. Everything seems pretty passive at the moment for black, but the sparks are going to happen now. It is a key idea to remove that bishop and make it possible for white to close off the game. Look where the bishop goes. Okay, so knight comes, the bishop comes back. Now you're going to ask me, but why is white trying to exchange to give off his bishop for the knight? One of the things that we said in our theory at the start of the game is remove key defenders. So white is actually inviting black to take the bishop on g5 so that we can get rid of that knight there. Okay. Black still doesn't want to take it. King comes back. But now, look at that move. Now I need somebody. Any volunteers to explain to me what is happening there with bishop f6? Is it Raveen, Shekhala? Would you want to try and explain to me what is happening there with bishop f6? Why is white giving off that bishop?
So I think I may know why.
Okay, please tell me. Thank you.
So if the pawn takes the bishop, you take back with the pawn, and
Yes.
you go to queen h6 check. So if the king moves to
Correct.
e8, you go knight d6 checkmate, and if it goes to what is it? Yeah, then it's
Yeah, you're
knight
right. So
d6.
pawn, if the pawn takes the bishop and then e takes f6, right? Threatening the queen h6 check afterwards. Is that what you're saying? So if black now takes the bishop here, and then you're going to take it back with a pawn, threatening queen h6, and you also got the possibility of the knight going to d6. Is that what you're saying there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So black saw that plan, but black did not budge at yet. You can see he's defending helplessly, but look at what white does. He still takes the bishop. And now look at the next move. Why go there? Why knight h2? Where does that knight want to go?
To c4, so the queen can go to h6.
Fantastic. G4, and the target is the h6. So there's a rerouting there. You can see at the moment, the weaknesses are being exploited. So now the key defender has been removed, which we spoke about in our notes, and there's an attack happening there. Notice also how black's pieces, the two rooks, the bishop, and the queen. They're all very quiet. Okay, there's only the knight on e6 that is a bit of a defense. Not really worthwhile talking about. Okay, so rook comes back that way, and instead of queen h6 immediately, or knight g4, sorry, to threaten that, let's try and remove the next defender. Okay, and they just look at that. White is even being more sneaky, and his next move, obviously, instead of taking, he captures there. Now he's threatening the promotion. Knight comes back to e6 to try and block off the rook on e1. There's your knight g4, and there is the threat of queen h6. And that is the final blow, promotion, so that if the rook takes the queen and then queen h6 there. So now white is 2 pieces behind. He's given up both of his knights, but the queen comes back, and that is enough for black to cry off, because now there's 2 queens on the board, and it's going to definitely, the next move is queen c3, and then you can actually expect that the game will finish within the next 2 moves or so. All right, so thank you for those who contributed there. The next theme that we're going to be looking at is restricting the opponent's pieces, which is the game between the 2 former world champions. Anatoly Karpov was defending his title against Garry Kasparov. Now in this game, you'll actually see that Kasparov had prepared an interesting sacrifice, positional sacrifice. Black has active play, but he still does not have concrete threats. So Kasparov played black, and he was played purely prophylactically, basically a wasted move, but he was thinking long term. But he first prevented the knight from going to e4 for white, and then also he looked at the possible development of the other knight to c4. And then you see that Kasparov had prepared an interesting positional sacrifice. Okay. So that is the current position. So from here onwards, it is black to move. Remember, our theme is to restrict the opponent's pieces. Okay, so shutting out the opponent's pieces, preventing the activity. I want you to see, look at black's activity now compared to white's 2 knights. White's 2 knights there, and compared to black's central bishops, the rook there, and white on the other hand has got an isolated pawn. Okay, so let's just see the next move, queen to d2. I'm just going to fast forward to b5. The b5 move, I'm just going to ask very quickly, Takutsa, why the b5 move? What was black's idea? Why play b5?
I think black wants to fork those 2 knights.
Right, he wants to play b4 later on, but also look at the knight on a3.
There's nowhere to go also.
Yes, so he wanted to stop the knight going to c4. You agree with me?
Yes.
Okay, because knight on c4 will allow for d6 to be played and so on. Thank you, Takutswa. Okay, so knight to d3 is very strong for black. And now, by playing knight to d3, definitely Takutsa's move of b4 is a threat to fork those two. And first g5, chasing the bishop away, and there comes the b4 move. So you can see what black is actually doing at the moment. He is restricting white's pieces big time. Okay, even the knight now on a4. Yes, it is attacking the bishop, but it is offside. Look at how these knights, that knight there on b1, the rook on f1. Look how passive they are. Okay, so let's just fast forward. Bishop to d6, bishop g3. And there you can actually see total control for black. Attacking those two files, controlling those two files all the way. You can actually see what's happening there. You can see what's happening with the bishops. You can see what's happening with the knights. Total center control. Okay, which I spoke about earlier. So there definitely is an initiative. I haven't even highlighted the bishop on d6 because that bishop is going to be exchanged now. Okay, so there g5 comes also to limit the knight from, prevent the knight from rerouting, coming this way to the king side. So now it is also stopped. And there the bishop is exchanged. And g3. At this stage, g3 is played because white was actually preparing for g4 to be played. Okay, and so therefore he needed an escape for that bishop. Okay, he was scared of that. Black could afford to take that risk of playing g4 because there's absolutely nothing happening here. Okay, obviously the king would perhaps go to h7 to cover the h6 pawn and then play that and start an attack there. All right. There's also the bishop now that can come to h3, but then the bishop will come to g2. Knight goes to d7 to obviously to reroute to come back to e5 or c5. There are different possibilities. And now, folks, you can actually see that the knight on a4 is completely dead. Okay, it cannot go to b6 or c5. That is one of the reasons why knight went to d7. So that knight is completely shut out of the game. The knight now actually wants to come back to b2 to try and force off the d6 knight. So I'm just running through some quick exchanges there. Even that pawn on d6, it is lost. White does not take immediately. And there's the g4 move, which you saw that I predicted earlier. Okay, it's also a bit of a prophylactic move, but it is actually holding back. White cannot advance any of his pawns here, so they are undeveloped, and there's no space really for him to get his pieces active. Okay, so the h6 square is protected now. I said earlier the king will end up moving. And there goes d6. And now you can actually see the weaknesses that were created here with these pawn moves. Okay. It's a pity this queen is here on d2 because then we would have had a nice target on the f2 square. Now the knight is definitely planning to come. It's attacking the weakness of g4. And you can actually see that the rook is going to come down as well. Somehow black's got his plans all sorted out. Knight to e4. And there comes knight f2. All right, so there black wins the exchange, and that is where white actually ends up calling it quits. Okay, people, based upon our topics, there won't be time to go to the second game restricting the opponent's pieces, but just talking about the initiative in the middle game, the theory that I referred to, the main overlapping points was to identify weaknesses, to restrict your opponent's pieces, shutting them out of the game. You need to consider structure. And once you've identified a weakness, if you can find a second weakness, then you target those weaknesses. And if you are attacking, keep on attacking. You need to uphold the initiative. You need to maintain that initiative. Do not exchange your most active pieces. Do not exchange your most attacking pieces. Do not allow your opponent to come back into the game. And the final point from my side is that you need to be patient. You need to work it out carefully. Concentrate your pieces. And when the timing is right, then you initiate that combination. Do not rush your moves. And you also need to identify your opponent's plan and counter whatever they are planning to do. Okay, any further questions or any final comments that anybody wishes to make? Nobody. All right. So I thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. So on
Thank
Thursday.
you.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Andrew. Was informative.
All right.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.